Hello, in this video we're going to go over how to create a to-do list app inside of React. By the end of this, we'll have a to-do list that the user can type entries into via a form. When submitted, they'll be added to a list. That list can be marked as, each entry in that list can be marked as complete, can be deleted, uh, and is persisted inside of local storage to make it so that when the user refreshes the page, we hold on to the value in state. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to start by creating a new React app using Vite. React, and I'm just going to go with JavaScript for this one. I'll npm I. And I'll npm run dev to kick it up. All right, let's go ahead and get that up. Let's get these pulled next to each other. I'm going to go ahead and pop open my SRC directory. I'm going to start trimming out bits and pieces I don't want. And for our purposes in this, the first big change that I'll make let's go ahead and change the title here. I'll change it to React to-do list. And I'm going to use Pico CSS just to have a basic CSS solution in place and make it look a little bit prettier. Let's head over to localhost 5173 here. And there she is. Okay. What other setup do I need to do? I've changed the title. I got the link to the CDN. Yep, I'll get to that in a second. For Pico we can see is already kicking up because it has that different background color to it. In the app, I'm going to go ahead and yank off all of this. I'm going to yank off their state variable, get rid of all of their imports, one of which is causing a problem, but so is main.jsx. It's trying to get the index.css. So at the end of it, it should look, your main.jsx should look like this. 3 main imports for React, React DOM client, and our app.jsx. It should be creating a root, and then inside of there rendering an app inside of strict mode. Inside of our app, we should have nothing yet. I'm going to go ahead and trim out the assets directory. We don't need that either. I'm not going to be too picky. We'll keep the favicon from Vite. Now that we have an empty canvas to work with, let's go ahead and start with thinking of what our to-do list will need. I would like a form up top that collects information from the user via an input and a button next to it that says submit. The input is going to take the text description of the to-do item, and the submit button will cause the form to be submitted when hit. When the form is submitted, I would like to have a new entry added to a bullet point list, an unordered list, in a second section underneath that. We'll start with that basic workflow first. So let's go ahead and create our form. Inside of that form, we have 2 main things. We have an input that will collect text input from the user, and a button that will submit the form. Let's go ahead and give it something a bit more semantic. We'll say it will add a to-do when that form is submitted. Cool. There's our input. There's our big add to-do button. Sweet. Do I have to say type is submit in order for it to... Okay. I'm going to explicitly say that the type of this button is a submit button. That way I get Pico kicking in and making this full width. Uh, for good practice, instead of using this fragment here, I'm going to turn this into a main tag. And I'm going to go ahead and give it the class name of container. And with Pico, that class name will say, oh, okay, so this is the main portion of your application, and you want to treat it like a container and give it that standard gutter off to the left and right. But we've got our form. Let's go ahead and also give our form a title. New to-do item. Oh, there we go. Make it a bit better. Create new to-do item. What can the user do in this section? Well, they can create a new to-do item. And this is our first main component. We'll get to componentizing that out in a moment. Let's go ahead and head down to list component. This guy's going to have another H1 to separate them out, and we'll say here's your to-do list. Inside of there, let's just sketch out what we want it to eventually look like. We'll have an unordered list with a couple of LIs inside of it. For right now, these LIs will just have entries. Walk the dog. Water the grass. Get groceries. And we have our bullet points. Walk the dog, water the grass, get groceries. We would now like this not to be a static list of list items here, but to be represented by a state variable. That way we can modify the state of the application as the user interacts with the page. So let's go ahead and introduce that state variable. I'm going to use the useState function. The initial value for this will be an empty list, and we'll call it to-do list items and set to-do list items for the setter. Down here, we'll do some iterative rendering. Let's go ahead and keep these as the entries inside of the default list. So to start with, this array will have a list of objects inside of it, each individual object noting one to-do list item. Each to-do list item will have a description, which will be the text. In this case, walk the dog for the first one. Let's go ahead and get two more underneath there. Walk the dog, water the grass, and get groceries. Now, rather than rendering these statically, we can templatize them out. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of them but one. This guy we're going to render multiple times for each entry inside of to-do list items. And rather than putting the static text here, we'll put whatever the description of the one to-do list item that we're iterating over at a time into it. So let's go ahead and surround this with curly brackets. We want to map through each item inside a to-do list items, and we want to return one of these for each item inside of there. So far, I'm returning one of these LIs, but it has walk the dog inside of it. We're mapping over the to-do list items, so we're trading out each entry inside of the list for something else. Let's go ahead and actually point at that one item at a time. So we'll say to-do list item singular, non-plural. And inside of there, I would like to render, or inside of here, I would like to render the description for this one to-do list item that I'm looking at right now. And there we go. So the map is going to go over the list one at a time, give us this object first for to-do list item, this item second, this object third, and we're just going to pop in and say, all right, make an LI, grab the description, throw it in there. One thing that React is mad about right now is we should have a unique key for each entry inside of our iterative rendering. So this li here ought to have a key property that React can consume in order to say, oh, this is this particular item. So we're going to go through and also have an ID property for each of these. I'm going to say that this guy has the ID of A, this guy has the ID of B, and this guy has the ID of C. For simplicity's sake right now, and down here I'll say that this li has a key property of to-do list item dot ID. That stops that from complaining, and now React knows, if it has the ID of A, it's this li that represents walk the dog. Even if we were to remove water the grass, let's say we had 1, 2, and 3 in that order. If we didn't have that key inside of there and we removed water the grass, React would think that the water the grass li had changed into the get groceries li. But really the only thing that happened was the water the grass disappeared and the get groceries moved up 1 to take its place. So with these IDs in place, React will be able to see that, oh, the ID of the key for this li for get groceries is still C like it was a snapshot ago, so I can just reuse that li that's rendering this guy. So we have that, we can create that, but let's do something a little bit spicier with the ID. I'm going to go ahead and use, look it up real quick. I want the crypto.js generate unique ID. I want the random UUID method. So I'm going to call crypto.randomUUID. For each of these, and rather than using a static A, B, and C like I was doing a moment ago just for demonstration purposes, now we'll use something that we can go over and call this random UUID and get a unique ID for the entries that we'll add going forward, rather than trying to come up with a system that does A, B, C, and then remembers to do D next and what have you. So over here, now this guy has, let's go ahead and check it out. Let's get a quick debug that just slaps that entire array onto the page for our perusal. I'll stringify that to-do list items and pop it on the page. So we have these IDs, they're unique, they're using the UUID pattern that comes from the crypto library, and it's all good to go. Let's go ahead and comment that out for now. And let's head toward creating a new item. We have these default ones that start off when the user comes to the page, sure, but now I would like to, as a user, be able to type something inside of here. Let's say make video on React to-do list and hit add to do. When I do, I would like to have a new item inside of here. So, as a dev, that tells me that when the user submits this form, I would like to go over and update this state variable such that when we go through and iteratively render every element over here, we are now rendering what we were a second ago, plus 1 new item with the text of make video on React to-do list inside of it. So I would want to create a new entry inside of here using a function that listens to the submission of this form, giving an ID of crypto.randomUUID and a description of whatever the user typed. Let's go ahead and create that. Inside of the form, I'm going to give it an onSubmit of handle create to-do list item. I'll go ahead and head up here, and that's going to be a callback, so I'll wrap it up in the memoization of use callback. This is going to be an event listener specifically for that handle submit. So I'm going to take the object describing the submit event that went off, and I'm going to prevent the default operation. That way the page doesn't do that refresh thing it likes to do. After that, I'm going to go over and update my to-do list items based off of its previous value. So I'm going to want my prev and my callback here instead of using the getter. I want to turn to-do list items into a new array that has all of the previous items shaken out into it. So I'm going to spread out what was inside of the previous array into this new array. And I want to create a new object after everything that already exists. It should have the ID of crypto.randomuuid, so go ahead and give me a new ID that's unique amongst the set. And it should have a description of whatever the user typed into that input. So let's backtrack a little bit here. That E points at, or is an object describing the event that went off. So on that event, there is a target of the event that went off, our form. Inside of that form, there is an input that we've typed text into. I'm going to go ahead and give that input a name property, and we'll say to do description. I can go over and say, all right, hey, event const form equals e.target. The form is the target of that submission event. All right, now inside of that form, we want the to-do description input. And now that I've given it that name, it's form.toDoDescription. When we get down to the description over here, let's say const new to-do description. We'll set that equal to that input's value. So a couple of steps here. We started with the event, went after the target. So the target of the submission event is the whole form. Inside of that form, there's an input that has the name of to-do description. In JavaScript, if you give an input or a select or a text area or what have you inside of a form a name, you can then go over and ask the form for that element by name, but it gives you the whole element. So when I say form.toDoDescription, this right here is linking up to this right here, and I get the whole input. That whole input now, I only want its current value out of there. So I'll pop into the input and say, give me what the user has typed inside of you. After doing so, I now have the value that I need for the new description for the new to-do list item that I'm creating. With that, every time the user submits this form, the handle create to-do list item function will go off. I'll prevent the default of that event so it won't try to use the browser's logic to submit the form. Instead, we'll use JavaScript. I'll go over and tunnel down into this particular input's current value, and I will set my to-do list item state variable to a new array with whatever it had there before, plus a new item with the ID of, give me a random one, and the description of whatever the user typed inside of the input. After that is done, I'm going to go into the to-do description input and tell it that its value is now an empty string. So we'll go over and clear what the user entered inside of there. Let's see that in action. I am a user. I come to the page, make React video. I can either click the Add to Do button, which remember has the type of submit, which all buttons do by default. Or I can just hit enter inside of this text input inside of the form, and it will also cause the form it's inside of to submit. I'm going to go ahead and click Add to Do. We run this function and a couple of things happen. We stop it from refreshing the page. We tunnel down into that value that the user has given us. We update that array to whatever it was before, plus a new object that has the random ID and the description that the user has entered. Then we come back here, and because our state variable has been modified inside of our component, React says, all right, let me call that component's function again and check to see if the return value has changed, which it has. Inside of here, when we call to-do list items.map, there's a new entry at the end of that list that now is that object that we created when the user submitted the form. And we get a new LI as a result with the key of whatever that random UUID was, plus the text of whatever the description that the user entered was. And there you have the basics of this React to-do list. We can go through and safely create new entries with unique IDs and descriptions inside of them. But there's a problem. If the user were to refresh the page, keep an eye on that new item that they made. Whenever you refresh the page, you lose your state. So we're coming back to this array again. We lose what the user changed the state to, and it's defaulting out to the initial state value again. Let's go ahead and add a new piece to that. I'm going to now start with an empty array to start. So we're just going to have the user's input inside of here. And rather than losing this input when the user refreshes the page, I'm going to use local storage, which you can find in Chrome. It's in application storage. In other browsers, it's going to be in a similar place. You're looking for local storage. It may have a title of storage up top or something to that tune. And then you're looking inside of your localhost 5173 if that's where your app is currently hosted at. And inside of here, we have a key value string to string database, basically. It's just a storage. This storage is persisted between sessions. When the user refreshes the page, or even when the user closes the application, their entire browser comes back into it. We can still have whatever the user had inside of there beforehand. For our purposes, we're going to create a new entry inside of here whose key is our to-do list items, and, well, is the text of to-do list items, and whose value is the actual value of to-do list items at the time. In order to do that, I'm going to use a use effect that goes off whenever to-do list items is changed, and it will go over and update whatever's inside of local storage at the key of to-do list items to whatever the current value of to-do list items is. Really easy inside of React, or really small, real simple. We're going to call use effect, and I already know my dependency for this. Whenever to-do list items changes, I would like this use effect to go off again. I would like to go over and tell local storage to set the item with the key of to-do list items to, now it's a string to string store. I cannot just give it the array and expect it to do the right thing. I need to go over and convert that array into a string version of it. So I'll use json.stringify to-do list items. And there we go. And you can see it already popped up. That's because it went over and ran this when the component re-rendered. Now we have an entry inside of here with a key of to-do list items and the value of, well, the initial state of to-do list items, json.stringify to-do list items. Let's go ahead and modify that and watch it update. So if I come through and say I need to make a React video and that's what I'm going to add, I now have a new entry inside of here that says make React video, and because that state variable updated, my use effect went off, and now I have the updated entry, the updated to-do list items inside of my local storage. Which is all well and good, but that's the first part of it. I am now successfully storing information inside of my local storage. But I'd like to be able to retrieve that information and use it as the initial value for the state variable instead of always using an empty array to start. So inside of, if I were to refresh this right now, it would go back. I updated it to an empty array because that's the initial value when I refresh the page. So we have to come in here and change that portion of the workflow as well. Let's go ahead and get rid of this empty array just for the sake of demonstration here. I now want to go over and say, whenever you initialize this state variable, go into local storage, get the item of to-do list items, if it's there. That's going to get the value, so it's going to get whatever's over here. But remember, this is a string-to-string store, so this, even though Chrome is being nice and displaying it as an array, is actually the string with a couple of square brackets inside of it. It would be a string with a couple of squares and some curlies and whatnot inside of it if we had an entry inside of there. And we now want to do the counterpart to stringifying it. We want to parse it. Let's go ahead and word wrap this so we can see. So on local storage.getIteming to-do list items, and I'm passing that into json.parse. That is great if there's something inside of there. But if there's not something inside of here, then this returns. Let's go ahead and get rid of this one. I can do that by right-clicking the entry and clicking delete. If I head over to the console and run this real quick, allow pasting. I thought I already had that. If I come over here real quick and paste this json.parse local storage.getItem to-do list items without an entry inside of my local storage that has the key of to-do list items, I get null. So that's when I'm going to say, all right, if you get null from that, just default out to the empty array again as a backup, because I never want this to-do list items to have that null in it. So since null is falsy, I can say, all right, if that's the case, or out to an empty array. But if it doesn't come back null, it's because I got whatever was inside of there. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that it's my array that I stored in there earlier. So when I save this and head over to here, we can now see that we still have the empty array because we tried to come in here and ask for what was inside of local storage at to-do list items, but it was null, so we defaulted out to an empty array. And if I say make React video, not only can I get this inside of here now, but when I refresh the page, we won't lose this. And there we go, I just did. I can refresh the page as many times as I want. The local storage is now being queried when we come to the page and initialize the state variable, asking, hey, do you have to-do list items? If you do, go ahead and let's turn it into an array and store that inside of the local the to-do list item state variable, otherwise come out to an empty array. So we get our actual array, and now the information stored inside of this state variable is persisted inside of local storage and vice versa. So I can come through and walk the dog, I can come through and eat Cheerios. I don't know, that's something that just jumped to mind. And if I close this even and come over to localhost 5173, I'm back again. I don't lose my data. And there we go. That was a brief walkthrough on how to create a to-do list app inside of React using useState in order to create a state variable that persisted our items inside of it. Using useEffect to go over and store those items inside of local storage, and then having another part that went over and read those items out of local storage when we initialize the state variable, having a handler, an event handler, that listens for the submission of this form, and when it does, goes through and adds a new entry using the entered data to our to-do list items array, and cleans up after ourselves. And then we have a list component that's responsible for coming through and rendering that list of to-do list items. The next portion of this is going to be cleaning it up, making it better. So, one thing that I said I would do, we already did the local storage. I want to come through and make it so that the user can mark one of these entries as complete. In order to do so, I just want the user to physically click on the item, and when they click on the item, I would like to toggle what we have for complete for that particular item. And this is why I started by creating objects for each of these entries. Not only did we want an ID that was better than just trying to use the description for the key, also, I want to add more properties to this. I want to contain more information about each individual to-do list item. So as a rule of thumb, as a quick trick, if you start off an application like this and come to the conclusion that you'll need some sort of data storage, especially a list, don't just do the bare minimum. Don't just do a string with a description inside of it. You could, But then you'll have to change things up when you want to do anything more complex. Use an object. Easy enough to make, easy enough to make on the fly, little bit bigger, but that's the trade-off for being able to be bigger, hold more information. So whenever we create one of these items now, I'd like to by default mark it as incomplete. So I'm going to create a new property on it where complete is false when it's created. This, if I already have entries, will work beautifully because if I ask for complete off of an object that doesn't have complete, I'll get undefined. And that's false E. So it's close enough. I can treat it like false inside of the next bit of logic that I'm going to do. So when our li is clicked, I would like to toggle the entry that it represents complete to the other value. Let's go ahead and add an onClick to this. We can even add some CSS to make it obvious, but for right now, we'll say onClick. And we'll have a handle toggle completed. Let's go ahead and just like we did with the handle create to-do list item, we'll handle toggle completed equals use callback. Inside of here, we expect to be able to call this with the ID of the to-do list item that the user is marking as complete. So there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. I'm going to go ahead and use a helper function inside of here. So not only will we call handle toggle completed, but there will be a function in between that calls handle toggle completed for us, and we'll pass in to-do list item dot ID. So we'll get the ID of the to-do list item that's being toggled. And we are going to update, as a result, our to-do list item state variable again based off of its previous value. I want to go through and update this array, but I want to update just the one item that has the same ID as this, the one that was passed into us when we clicked the item. And that particular guy and nobody else inside of the list, I want to change his complete to whatever it wasn't a second ago. I want to flip it as a Boolean. And that's what's going to take the undefined and turn it into true and get it into the true or false from there. A little bit of backwards compatibility to it. So I want to return prep. I want to return exactly what it was a second ago, but I'm going to map through. I'm going to look at every single to-do list item that already exists. If that to-do list item has an ID that is not equal to the ID that I should be updating, I'm going to go ahead and return the to-do list item unscathed. I'm not going to change a thing about it. This isn't the guy that I'm looking for. This can just go directly into the new list that I'm creating with the map. However, if it is the guy, then we will not have returned inside of this if statement, and we'll get down to 42 here. If that's the case, and we're looking at the guy that we want to change, then I'm going to go ahead and return a new object for this particular to-do list item. I'm going to shake off everything that was inside of that to-do list item a second ago, but I'm going to set its complete to what it wasn't. So I'm going to use the exclamation point as a Boolean not operator to flip whatever value we have here. And I'm going to say, hey, to-do list item, what was your complete a second ago? Or what is it currently? I want to take that and turn it into whatever it wasn't. So whether it was undefined or false, we'll flip it to true. And if it's true, we'll flip it back to false. And we'll homogenize the data from there. So now I've got this, but that's just an input. What about an output to show the user that, hey, this particular list item is done? Well, let's sneak some style in here. First things first, just for the user's sake, I want to change the cursor to a pointer. That way, when the user hovers over one of these list items, they realize, oh, yeah, this is clickable, instead of having that text selector. So now the user gets a hint that these are clickable, and if I come through and say, well, if this is complete, I want you to mark it as gray. I want you to change the color of it. So we'll say color is, and we want a ternary statement here. We either want gray or we want undefined so that this doesn't actually come out in the style and there's no color change inside of the inline style. So I'm going to go ahead and make a ternary. The first part of any ternary is our question. Our question is this particular to-do list item complete? Then we have our question mark. Then we have our if true value. If it is complete, I want the color of this to be gray. Nice and simple. Then we have our colon to separate our if true from our if false. If it's not complete, then I don't want to give any particular color to the style. I saved that, and you'll notice nothing's changed yet, but that's because I haven't clicked on one of these to change them to complete yet. Let's go ahead and say that I ate my Cheerios. It's now grayed out. To make that a little bit more obvious, let's make it light gray. Light gray isn't a real color. I thought it was. What about... Oh, he's coming from... Oh, gray text. Neat. That must be coming from Pico. Let's do red. Cool. We ate the Cheerios. That wouldn't be a good color for UX, but I'm just putting it here in case anybody was unable to see that it grayed out when I clicked on it. Now, if I were to click it again, it would toggle it back, and it would say, I am no longer complete. I would flip it from true, which it would be after the first click, back to false. So now we have the opportunity to come through here and say, yeah, I finished this. So we can add items. We can toggle the completion of individual items. I'm going to put this back to gray. And is there anything I was missing in terms of what I said I would walk you through on this? Componentization. I've called these components, but that's just because they're chunks of HTML. Let's go ahead and turn them into actual components so that we do have a separation of our scopes here, because there's a clear delineation and separation of scope here. Delineation? There's a clear separation of scope here. We have our form, and we have our list. And these two can very much live on their own. So inside of source, I'm going to create a components directory, and inside of there, I'll say to do form.jsx, to do list.jsx. I'll start with the form. I'll give my basic skeleton here, export default function to do form. It'll take in some props, which we'll destructure and get to later. Ignore VS Code complaining about what it's complaining about here. We just haven't put anything inside of here yet, and we will. And we'll return, well, let's just go over and steal this. It was working great. This H1. Now the trouble here is we have this H1 next to this form. These two are siblings. We cannot have multiple top-level parents inside of a chunk of HTML, inside of a chunk of JSX. So there we go. Now I have one parent, the fragment. This will not render onto the page, but it will surround these two and provide that and solve that rule that React has given us that we must have one top level element when it comes to a particular component. Now with this handle create to-do list item was given to us by app.jsx. We still want it to live up here because the state is going to be managed by app.jsx so that to-do form can have access to it, and so can our to-do list in just a second. So when we create an instance of our to-do form, I want to give it an on, what did I call it? Create to-do list item. And we'll call that, or we'll set that to the value of apps handle create to-do list item. The reason I'm changing this around, and instead of calling it handle, calling it on, is now we have a to-do form that has an event of creating a to-do list item. Just like our form has an event of doing the submission. So our to-do form has this onCreate to-do list item, and whoever creates an instance of it, just like whoever creates an instance of the form here, must provide, hey, when this happens, on this happening, go ahead and handle it in some manner. So we're going to call the function handle whatever it is, and we're going to call the event listener on whatever it is. So now we've got that React is, or Vite is going to complain because it wants props validation. So let's go ahead and do best practices for that. We'll import prop types from prop types, prop dash types, if I can type today. There we go. We'll tell the to-do form that it has prop types of, well, you're going to get an onCreate to-do list item, and that is going to be a function. Cool. Now it knows what to expect. It knows to expect a function as a property to to-do form by the name of onCreate to-do list item. And it realizes that, yeah, I can pass a function into this onSubmit, and it will play the role of an event handler. Now I have this, I've refactored this first bit. I can get rid of this comment because it's pretty self-explanatory. This is now the form component. If I come over here and say, drink coffee, definitely sounds like a good to-do item, and submit that, it works exactly like it did before, which is what we want to see in a refactor. We went through and did some work, and it came out the exact same, but with a better structure. Let's rinse and repeat for our to-do list. So we're going to go ahead and take the chunk of HTML that's responsible for our to-do list. We're going to export default function to-do list, and we'll take some parameters in just a moment, or some properties in just a moment, and we'll return that HTML. Now, let me take a step back. I'll return my fragment with that HTML in it. Make life a little bit easier. So, this to-do list wants items, like we see over here. Just going to shrink it up because it doesn't really matter too much. We know we're inside of the to-do list. We don't need to say it's the to-do list items. In the handle, and then we're going to have an event of toggling the completed, so we'll have an on toggle completed. We'll head back over to the app.jsx, create an instance of our to-do form. Note that I'm taking the autocomplete, so it's automatically, it did for the to-do form, it didn't for my to-do list. What did I do? I said export default function to-do list. I created an instance of the to-do form for whatever reason again. There we go, the to-do list. I'm taking the autocomplete, so we're getting these imports up here because VS Code is being so kind as to go, yeah, that's the one that you're talking about. If it doesn't, remember to go get your imports. Now the two properties that the to-do list expects is an items and an on toggle complete. So the items, we have that state variable of to-do list items. And the on toggle completed, we have the handle toggle completed. So we're doing the exact same thing we were doing a second ago. We're just reconfiguring this such that the to-do form and the to-do list are their own separate components. Let's head back over here. We'll do the same thing that we did before. We'll import prop types from prop-types. And we'll say, hey, to-do list, you have prop types of, items is an array of objects. So prop types dot shape is what they call an object. We'll tuck an object inside of here to say what properties are on it. Every item inside of here we expect to have an ID, which is a string. We expect it to also have a complete, which is a boolean or a bool. No. Prop types dot, there we go, bool. And we expect it to have a description, which is a string. So our items property is an array of objects which have IDs of strings, complete of booleans, and description of strings. And our on toggle completed is just a function, just like the on handle create was, or on create to-do list item was. So again, a refactor, everything should just work the way that it was doing a second ago. I'm going to even refresh for kicks, even though it's already updated, just to demonstrate. And inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and say that I should definitely go over and water the plants. Cool. Let's say I've already drank my coffee. Everything's working exactly like it was a second ago. It's receiving the list of to-do list items as its items property. It's mapping over that, and it's creating a new LI just like it was a second ago. The on click for which is on toggle completed instead of handle toggle completed, but the value of this on toggle completed when it's created up here inside an app is handle toggle completed. Done and done. Believe that walks us through the entirety of the React to-do list. We created a form that the user can type in a new to-do item inside of. They submit it. When they submit it, we grab that text and say, let's go ahead and create a new item. We can mark items as complete, and the information is persisted inside of local storage and retrieved from local storage. And the user can also, and we've also gone through and properly componentized out our logic such that we had a separation of scope where it made sense. This to-do form is responsible for going over and collecting the information from the user, and on being submitted on the user requesting that we create a new to-do list item via the to-do form, we run our handle create to-do list item logic, and our to-do list is responsible for rendering our list of items as they currently exist. And when one is clicked, toggling the completion, firing a toggle completion event, which is handled just the way it was before. And that was quite a mouthful. We've got it functional though. I hope it was helpful, and if you need any assistance in making a React app like this, or any other React app that you're working on, please go ahead and check out the link in the description. Thank you.